Thanks very much, Sharon McKenzie. Yes, Julie Bishop in Fiji, as we've seen there in that report at the moment, but later this week she'll be in Canberra meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister. Remember, Iran, the axis of evil country, their Foreign Minister will be in Australia meeting with Julie Bishop within a couple of days. That was one of the issues I took up with the Resources Minister when I spoke to him from Melbourne earlier this evening. Welcome back to Viewpoint, Josh Frydenberg.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
Look, you're heading off as Resources Minister to Western Australia tonight for a major liquid natural gas export project tomorrow. How are these projects, massive investments in Western Australia and of course in Queensland in this area, how are these projects faring given the lowering commodity prices around the world?
Look, these projects are faring very well in the sense that they've got long-term contracts and demand for gas is increasing throughout the world and the IEA estimates it will increase by 50% between now and 2040, and Australia overtakes Qatar as the world's largest LNG exporter by 2020, which is a very significant achievement. You see, Chris, we're in the third phase of the resources boom. The first phase was the prices boom, where we saw enormous increase in prices. That led to the second phase, which was the investment boom, and a massive investment, and we saw $200 billion invested in energy production here in Australia in the decade to 2014. Now we're in the production boom, the third phase, where projects like Gorgon, which is a $70 billion project, employed 10,000 people off the coast of Western Australia, will see its first shipment of LNG go off tomorrow, which will be very significant indeed.
But when you talk about that production boom, of course, in terms of quantities, Australia is still exporting massive quantities of coal, iron ore, and as you say, growing in liquid natural gas. But with the prices plunging so low, what are the medium-term prospects for the resources sector in the economy? It's made up about 10% of our GDP in recent years. Do we have to get used to it making up a smaller share of that? Do we have to find other growing areas in the economy to replace it?
Oh, we are certainly affected by the downturn in prices, and prices of oil, for example, have come from $140 a barrel to just above $30 a barrel not that long ago, and iron ore went at one stage from $180 a tonne down to just over $40 a tonne, has creeped up from there. So that does affect our export earnings, and the Prime Minister is absolutely right that the economy more broadly does need to transition to other aspects of the new economy, and that's why you're seeing an emphasis on innovation and the digital economy from the government. At the same time, resources is very important. We have dominant positions in the world as the #1 exporter of coal, the #1 exporter of iron ore, the largest uranium reserves in the world, and soon to be the #1 exporter of LNG. These are world-class deposits and resources we have in Australia, and we are leading the world in the innovation practices that see those exports earn billions of dollars worth of income for our country.
I was just going to ask on uranium, with the negotiation of a deal with India, are uranium exports expected to increase in coming years? Is that a growing area for our resources exports?
Look, I think so. Uranium is used throughout the world to form nuclear power. In the United States, it's around 20% of their energy production. In France, it's above 70%. In countries like China and India, it's of increasing importance. We in Australia have all this uranium, but we don't, as you know, turn it into power here at home. But there has been an interesting Royal Commission conducted by the South Australian government, which has been looking at all aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle,
yeah, just
and
on
turning
that,
uranium into power is one of those.
Yeah, sure. They say that's a long way off, though, probably not economic at the moment, but they've certainly looked a lot at the disposal of radioactive waste, of nuclear waste. Now, I know that you as a federal government are looking at a low-level national repository in South Australia. Let's put that to one side. I think everybody sees the sense in that. But do you support this idea that's being promoted in South Australia to have what's effectively an export industry, even though you're importing the waste, but to bring high-level nuclear waste into Australia, into South Australia, to be safely stored or disposed of in South Australia? There's suggestions that this be a multi-billion-dollar export earner for Australia, of course taking waste that most of the world doesn't want.
Well, Chris, a few important points. Firstly, you're right. I'm looking for a site, and there are 6 shortlisted sites, to store low-level and intermediate waste. This is the waste that we create here in Australia, predominantly through the production of nuclear medicines. The Royal Commission has looked at Australia taking, or South Australia more particularly, taking high-level waste, which is from the reactors that turn the uranium into power in other parts of the world, for storage in Australia. That's a different process. They say that would create up to 5,000 jobs and worth $5 billion a year to the South Australian economy.
And do you support investigating that option?
We certainly support the Royal Commission process, and we've now had the interim findings with the final findings in May. I think this is a healthy debate to have. I can see the benefits that would accrue to South Australia, but you would need a broad political consensus, a bipartisan consensus, and you would also need a broad community consensus, and that by no means has yet been achieved, but we're happy for the debate to continue.
But South Australia couldn't do this on its own. It would need federal government approval, probably federal legislation, I think. So in the interest of kicking off that bipartisan support, are you saying a coalition government would support such a high-level waste, nuclear waste disposal industry?
We'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it, but I would say it would be a brave federal government, Labor or Liberal, that stood in the way of a state government, in this case South Australia, that wanted to proceed down that path if it had that broad community support.
Okay, while we're on the nuclear industry, I want to talk about Iran. Of course, Iran's been a rogue nation for many years. It's had been identified in the past as belonging to the axis of evil. There has been that nuclear deal struck with the US and European nations to try and bring Iran's nuclear weapons development under control, to try and delay that, to try and bring it back into the international community. But the Iranian foreign minister is coming to Australia this week. He's meeting with our Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, Julie Bishop seems to be trying to normalise our relations with Iran. Don't we need to be very, very wary of this nation, given its track record and given what it's still doing in trying to develop long-range missiles and export weapons?
Look, I think Julie Bishop is skillfully navigating this difficult issue very well, and as she has said, the onus is on Iran to show that it can actually cooperate as a partner with the international community. The onus is not on us, the onus is on Iran. Now, Julie Bishop visited Iran last April. Part of those discussions there were to have further consultations on immigration matters, among others, and it's not unusual that then, therefore, to have a reciprocal visit by the Iranian Foreign Minister of Australia.
Sure. We want more trade with Iran, and we also want them to take back Iranian asylum seekers. So there are things we want from Iran, but at the same time, this is a country that continues to support the evil terrorist organisation Hezbollah, that continues to export arms, and also that test fires missiles, and with inscriptions on those missiles saying that they still want to wipe Israel off the face of the planet. Very difficult for us to have normalised relations with such a country, surely.
Well, I think Julie Bishop, indeed the Australian government, and indeed the international community are very realistic about Iran's behaviour. On the one hand, it is fighting ISIS, which is our enemy in the Middle East right now, and on the other hand, as you say, it's supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation in Australia, Hezbollah, and they are two sides of the same coin, which is Iran. Now, we have to speak truth to power, if you like, and tell Iran very firmly our concerns, which no doubt Julie Bishop has done and will continue to do. At the same time, Iran has reached this agreement with the international powers over its nuclear program, and we have an upcoming visit from the Iranian Foreign Minister, and we'll be dealing with issues that are important to Australia. So I'm confident that Julie Bishop can navigate through those tricky waters.
Okay, on to the prosaic world of domestic politics now. And should the Liberal Party ever preference the Greens?
Well, as you know, the Liberal Party prides itself, Chris, on separating out its parliamentary wing, which is dominant when it comes to policy, and its organisational wing, which determines the running of elections
Sure.
issues like preference deals.
Whichever wing it is, should they preference the Greens, a party that surely is anathema to everything the Liberal Party stands for?
Well, I would say never. I would not say never ever. And the reason why I'd say that is because look at the deal we were able to strike in the Parliament with the Greens over policy issues, and particularly the savings we got to changes to welfare after last year's budget. Now, that was a good initiative from Scott Morrison in terms of budget repair, and the Greens came to the table when the Labor Party didn't. Now,
sure, but you've got to negotiate. Sorry to interrupt, but you've got to negotiate with whoever's in Parliament. That's a separate issue. We're talking about how to vote cards and preference deals. Surely the Liberals should draw a line in the sand and say they will not preference the Greens ahead of the Labor Party in the interests of what they believe is the best thing for the country.
Look, I have great concerns with many aspects of the Greens party platform, particularly their policies around international affairs, their policies around taxation, their policies around other elements of our economy. They're all care and no responsibility when you talk about the Greens. But I'm not going to, as a minister in the Turnbull government, I'm not going to tie the hands of Tony Nutt and Richard Alston and Michael Kroger and others in the organisational wing who have to make the decisions based on the best interests of the party at a particular time, and I don't have all the facts and all the figures to actually make that determination. So I wouldn't say never ever, but as they do and I do, we have a very healthy, as I do, we have a very healthy scepticism about any discussions with the Greens.
Okay, a couple of quick questions. We hear a lot of speculation about bringing the budget early, a double dissolution election, all sorts of a public debate about political tactics, if you like. Does Malcolm Turnbull actually have a plan for the nation in terms of prosperity, economic reform and policy initiatives?
Well, I think Malcolm Turnbull has done a fantastic job since coming into the role, and we're seeing the benefits across the economy of a strong coalition government and its policies.
Which policies has he changed? Which policies has Malcolm Turnbull changed since he became Prime Minister?
Well, 3 big announcements in the last few weeks. We've seen, or a little while, we've seen the innovation policy, $1 billion worth of initiatives. We've seen extra $30 billion of spending on defence and in particular focus on Northern Australia. And we've seen some important media reform. But look at the figures, Chris. 3% GDP growth is faster than in G7 nations and above the OECD average. 300,000 new jobs created last year, which is, as you know, fastest growth numbers since 2006. Female workforce participation levels at the highest on record, and as you say, free trade agreements which were locked in by Tony Abbott have now started to produce real benefits with increasing of agricultural exports and exporter services. So there is a very good story to tell. Malcolm Turnbull has real credibility when it comes to the economy. Bill Shorten is a subsidiary of the union movement. His industrial relations policy was written in the headquarters of the ACTU and rewards bad behaviour.
Bill Shorten, whatever you think of the policy, he's putting some policy out there. I just want to finish up on one final question, and that is we saw a lot of publicity last week relating to those nasty allegations put out there in Nikki Savva's book about an alleged affair between Peter Credlin and Tony Abbott. Shouldn't we hear more from the government condemning this smear? I mean, isn't this a very based and very typical sexist smear that we always hear against a successful woman, the nasty suggestion that perhaps they've had an affair with the boss? I mean, shouldn't this be condemned in outright terms by everybody who's got anything to do with the coalition?
Well, you'll be familiar with US politics, Chris, and there was Harry Truman famously had that plaque on his desk which said the buck stops here. And I think Tony Abbott would certainly subscribe to that he was the Prime Minister, he takes the responsibility. But, it's unfair to target Peter Credlin in the way I think she has been targeted. Sure, there may have been issues there that the government could have improved upon, but this laser-like focus focus on her, I do think has been unfair. That being said, the more we talk about it, the more we create this politics of distraction and give the Labor Party a free kick. And I know that you wrote your piece on the weekend, Chris, where you said we should ignore this white noise and no longer dance to its tune. And I think that's right. I don't think we should be paying attention to this from here on. We've got to focus, as John Howard said, on the main game, which is the Labor Party and winning this election and putting out good economic policy as we have done to date.
Okay, Josh Frydenberg, thanks for joining us on Viewpoint once again.
Great to be with you, Chris.